welcome to, that was the week that was, week 20 of 2023, where Vince McLeod fills us in on the Alternative Centre's view of the events of the last week. Hi Vince, how's life in Nelson this week?
Hi Bob, things are going really good at Nelson. It's quiet, but the proper winter hasn't kicked in yet, so I'm enjoying the rest of the warmth while I still can.
Good plan. It's been raining here all day, pretty wet and miserable. But let's just jump straight into it. We have a busy week. Russia launched a particularly heavy bombardment on Kiev, but was successfully repelled. What do you make of this attack, Vince?
I think that the Russians are starting to fear that they've lost control of the initiative of the war, and that the war is bogged down because they've made so little progress over the last 7 months. They've been fighting over Bakhmut for most of this time. I think they're looking for something unusual to show that they're still in control of the situation, they're still in charge of the direction of this war. So I think they're just trying to make a spectacular attack and hope it succeeds.
Well, we also heard that Ukraine claimed that it had destroyed Russia's hypersonic missiles and that the long-range British missiles are pushing the Russians back in the occupied territories. So another good week for the arms dealers. But does Ukraine have the upper hand?
The arms dealers will be doing great right now, especially with news that America has allowed some other European countries to donate F-16s to Ukraine. That's going to mean that those countries are going to have to buy new ones from America. So that's going to mean billions of dollars flowing into arms dealers' money coffins. So I think Ukraine is, I don't know if you could possibly say they're winning because they haven't really pushed Russia out of any of the territory that Russia has conquered, but they're certainly not losing. They're holding their ground to a much greater extent than just about anybody predicted before the recent conflict around Bakhmut. So I think they're doing better than what most expected them to do.
The World Meteorological Organization released a report stating that for the first time ever, global temperatures are likely to breach 1.5 degrees centigrade or 35 degrees Fahrenheit of warming in the next 5 years. How bad could it get, Vince?
It could get extremely bad. If you follow the science, some are predicting that we may have baked in as much as 4 degrees Celsius of warming, such that even if we stopped emitting greenhouse gases today, the temperature would still rise another 2.5 degrees just simply from all of the greenhouse gases that have already been emitted. So it's possible that we've completely cooked the planet, but that's why the Alternative Centre believes in not worrying so much about the material side of things, like increasing possessions and wealth and so on, and rather focusing on the spiritual side of things and trying to have gratitude for what you've got, because the way that we're living looks like it's going to destroy the planet if we don't make significant changes quickly.
Yes, well, last week we had our second tsunami warning for this season, and the world is seeming an increasingly dangerous place after decades of complacence. The Alternative Centre really advises stoicism in times such as these, doesn't it?
Stoicism in times like these, especially because the establishment positions are all materialist, they're all greed-based. The alternative left is also it's not spiritual. They just believe in getting revenge, more or less. So the Alternative Centre is the only real spiritual side. So yeah, I think we would recommend that people turn away from the consumption side of life. Try not to find happiness in consumption, and try and find happiness in social connections, because the easy consumption times are running out.
Wonderful advice, indeed. Well, the latest New Zealand budget was released last week. As is to be expected, it is full of political manoeuvring at the expense of the average citizen. But there is good news in that prescription costs are going to be abolished and childcare subsidies will be raised. Is this the silver lining on a grey cloud?
It's clear that people with children, especially people with young children, were the big winners from the budget this week. No one else really benefited a whole lot. $5 off prescriptions is all right, but that's not going to make a significant difference to the life of the average invalid's beneficiary. So I think probably what Labor were planning was to not dole out so many lollies this time around, and to let National try and make a criticism of what was actually quite an austere budget.
Unfortunately, there's always a serpent in Eden, as the saying goes, and one of the negative consequences of this budget is that we are now expecting a further interest rate hike. Will it go up to 6% on Wednesday, do you think?
I don't believe it'll hit 6%, but I do believe that 5.75% is very likely. They were talking about 5.5% as being the most likely until this budget, where Grant Robertson spent more money than what commentators had expected. So I think that's expected now to have an inflationary effect, and the Reserve Bank will probably take that into account. And so I think 5.75 is what we can expect the interest rate to get raised to. I don't think it'll go higher because inflation appears to be holding in most economies overseas. So I think the general inflationary movement is probably finished for now, and so long as more money doesn't get printed. And so I think the Reserve Bank will probably look for a moderate response to the budget news.
Interest.co.nz has highlighted surging migration in New Zealand, predicting the fastest population growth in decades. It could be almost 2.5% by the end of this year. It will be a really great opportunity for local businesses, won't it?
It'll be a great opportunity for landlords as well. Anybody who wants to put rents up and to keep wages low, they'll be the major beneficiaries of this. Some are surprised that it's happening under Labor, but you can observe that the same thing's happening in Australia and Canada. They're both having record immigration right now. So I think really it's a matter of the capitalists who are in charge, just pumping up the cheap labor inflows to the maximum possible extent.
Mm. Well, on the downside, there's also the fact that we're in the middle of a housing crisis, and all these new migrants come at a cost to the little guy. The alternative centre is not strongly in favour of migration on the whole, is it?
I am a nationalist alternative centrist, and so for me, I see immigration as something that is only permissible if it contributes to the genetic infrastructure of the nation. We're not at all in favour of the importation of cheap labour. As I mentioned before, it's only landlords and slave drivers who win from the importation of cheap labour. Everybody else loses. So the immigration news, the migration news is definitely bad news as far as I'm concerned, because I know that the sources of skilled labour have pretty much been tapped, and so now they're just pumping in as many people as possible. So I think we can expect further standards of living to fall, and I think we can expect homelessness to grow out of all proportion.
We have had a week full of stress here in New Zealand, but over in Australia, they are eagerly awaiting the 1st of July when prescriptions for MDMA will become legal. Australia is the first country in the world to legalize psychedelics, and this is a big step in the right direction according to your reckoning, isn't it?
It's a big step in the right direction for anybody who's followed the trends of psychiatric science over the last 10 or 15 years. We can see that the science is moving a lot more towards psychedelics, in particular MDMA, which is considered a minor psychedelic by some, and psilocybin therapy, which I think is going to be the next big step. MDMA therapy has shown immense promise for those suffering from traumatic stress disorders, and traumatic stress is now starting to become understood as the number one contributor to mental illness, and not so much bad genes like it was commonly believed to have been up until recently. So MDMA has shown great promise in people who have returned from war, who have got PTSD through war. And I think it's going to be shown that it also has great promise for people with traumatic stress disorders that have been picked up in childhood. So I think this is great news. This is excellent news. And I think Australia has shown the way forward for the rest of the world here, in New Zealand ought to follow soon after.
It's fantastic. Well, the article about the MDMA talks of the brain becoming stuck in certain negative feedback loops, which cause stress and anxiety. And it suggests that psychedelics can break these patterns, causing instant healing. What advice would the alternative centre give to a mentally ill person seeking healing through psychedelics?
The justification for electroshock therapy up until now has been that it wipes the slate clean and allows a person to reboot their brain and get a fresh start. So I think that psychedelics will prove to be a far, far less unpleasant way of achieving a similar thing, but without the electroshock side of things. As far as advice is concerned, I would say that you want to try and get as pure a product as possible, and that means try and source it off the white market from a doctor's prescription if you can, and not so much off a gang member off the black market, because you don't know if that's going to be MDMA or any kind of garbage. There's all kinds of garbage being sold as MDMA on the New Zealand black market, so I wouldn't bother with it too much until I was able to get a legal white market prescription. Then you at least know what you're dealing with.
Well, the world continues to roil and rage at an alarming rate. And what a week that was, Vince.
Yeah, it was a crazy week, all right, but still some good news in there mixed in. So I think there's a lot to be positive about, despite the increasing war tensions.
The alt centre are clown world's good guys. They don't fit into boxes neatly enough to be someone else's tools.